Hey, it's Jack, and I wanted to do a short video here on the different things that you might want to think about when you're going to be figuring out your practice for scales. Now, you know that if you're going to get to a pretty accomplished part of playing the guitar, you're going to have to work on scales. This is something that I ignored for years and years, and I was always wondering, why am I getting any better? And I think it has a lot to do with just a short time, even if you did like 15 minutes a day for 4 or 5 days a week on scales. I think you're going to notice a huge improvement over playing songs and that kind of thing. So before you tackle that whole thing, because there's so much information out there, there are a couple different things to consider because you're going to have choices, and then you may come across, well, what do I do here? Should I do this or should I do that? So I don't think this is an exhaustive list, but I want to go over all the things that I've come across in my study and what I'm practicing, and then this way you can decide, which way should I go on this. Just at least you're aware. And of course, as always, if I forgot something, please send me a note, put something up on the eBay rather, or not eBay, on YouTube, and this way it can help me because I'm really just putting up my work here and my progress, and I'm always trying to get better. So let's look at some different things to consider. Okay, so the first thing is, what kind of shapes and patterns are you going to use? That's one of the great things about the guitar, is that we've got almost like 6 different pianos, and we can play the same note in multiple locations. Therefore, when we go to play scales, there are going to be different options for us to put our fingers down on different frets and get the same notes and the same scales. You may notice, if you've been playing for quite a bit of time, that you can have different pros and cons to shaping and organizing your notes in different ways. Now, I like to refer to small notes, groups of notes, as shapes, and usually will put them on 2 strings at a time. And if you look at some of my other videos, like on the pentatonic scale or on the diatonic scales, you're going to see that. I think it's easier for us to remember things in smaller chunks, and then we put that together rather than trying to memorize, let's say, a 6-string pattern at once. So I take shapes, I add them together, I make patterns. But which patterns are you going to use? So you have a couple of options. The first one would be the 5-position pattern, or it could be called a caged pattern if you're familiar with the cage system. That's a train of thought and a whole theory and a whole idea of music, that you can take different chords and scales from the 5 basic chords, C, A, G, E, and D, and they appear on the neck in that order, but of course it loops around, so that's where they get caged from. But another way to think about this is, these are the same patterns that are associated with the 5 pentatonic patterns. So when you have a 5-note scale, you're going to have 5 shapes. Then there is a way for a 7-note scale to arrange it in 7 different positions. We'll look at that in a minute. But these patterns will go right along with the pentatonic shapes. So for instance, if I was going to play G major in a cage system pattern, it might look like this. So what are some of the advantages or disadvantages? And again, this is all personal preference. I'm just trying to spell it all out. You have, again, a situation where you're covering the same area as the pentatonic. So if you already know your pentatonic shape, then you know that you're going to be just adding 2 notes to that in order to get a major scale, because the pentatonic major has 5 notes and the regular major scale would have 7 notes. So that could be an advantage, and in fact that's how I suggest that you go about this if you're new, is to learn the pentatonics first, then add in the other notes, and that'll help you to remember everything. The other thing is that your hands tend to stay in the same place, and you don't have to stretch as much in most cases. Sometimes with some other scales, you're going to see something where you're going to get a 5-fret stretch, and that might be difficult if you're beginning. With the cage system, you're only going to be covering basically 1 fret per finger, which helps out a lot. Now, the one thing that may turn some people off to this is that there are going to be strings, most of the time it's only one string, that have two notes. So in this example that I just played, the first one we see we have two strings, but actually if I was going to repeat this I would be able to use this fret as well. But when I get down to the B string, I've got two notes there, and then I have two notes here, but I also have this on the pinky, on the 5th fret. So because of that, it could be not as attractive, or not as wanted. You might not want to use that for certain sequencing or licks, or if you're playing a certain style of music. I will say that I believe that most jazz players use these kind of positions though, and a lot of those guys play very fast and complicated passages, so I wouldn't necessarily say that's going to hold you back from it, and we'll go over some other things. Another thing that I've personally found, and again, it can be said that you want to practice everything in every way, and that'll make you the best rounded player, and I agree with that. But if I'm playing 16ths, so if I'm playing something based on 4s, either 8th note pattern or 16ths, so 2s or 4s, then this kind of pattern turns around nicely, especially when you include those notes what I was talking about. So for instance, and you can see I come right back to there because the division works out. So I could just practice that, cycle it over and over. You get the idea. So that's one advantage to that. Maybe if you're beginning and you're practicing your 4-note patterns, then you might want to use that. Again, this is just stuff that I've figured out, or that I've observed, or that I've read. It's all up to you what you want to do. The next option would be a 3-note per string pattern. That would look like this. Again, this is still G major. Okay, we got a couple extra notes there. So what are the differences? You've probably saw. Let's talk about the reason why you might want to use this. It's because it's very consistent. And this, I believe, was probably around before this, but I think it started to get really popular in the 80s by players like Paul Gilbert and such, that started what they would call a shred technique. And the reason being is that you've got 3 notes per string, so every string's going to be consistent. Your picking's going to be consistent over and over. And this allows you to kind of learn one picking pattern, whatever you decide on, and apply it to tons and tons of scales. Because unlike the cage system where we're going to have 2 notes on some strings in different positions, this one we've got the same consistent thing over and over and over. So that's really good. And you might have guessed it, again, this is not a hard and fast rule, but if I'm going to play triplets or sextuplets, this is going to be a lot nicer for that. So first I just played the 16th note, but if I play it in a sextuplet, flows nicer with that because there are 3 notes per string. Of course you can play triplets with the other position, and you can play 16th notes with this. Of course you can, and it would probably be good because it kind of tricks your mind a little bit, because when you have 3 notes per string, at least for me, I'm more comfortable counting 1 2 3 1 2 3. When I introduce 4, then it kind of twists stuff up a good, but that can be a good thing. It's always good to play things that you're not exactly comfortable with. So the other thing, though, that maybe detract from you wanting to use this, and I suggest you try every different pattern and see what's comfortable, and probably you should try to get to be able to play just about anything, but you might have noticed, again, there's those large stretches. So that's the first thing. I've got 3rd, 5th, and 7th fret on 2 strings, and that can be a little difficult if you're beginning. The other thing is I have position shifts. I start on the 3rd fret, and then I'm shifting here. I end up all the way down on the 8th fret. Now I do get two extra notes down here, whereas up here I turned around there for the same G major scale. So there's an advantage also, and again, this is up to you to decide, but you're going to have a pretty big stretch with that. Now the last thing would be an hybrid, which some people use, and I like this one because it doesn't You know, you're not choosing just one or the other. And eventually, I think you'll just end up coming to this naturally because you're practicing everything. And then when you start to solo, you don't want things to sound like scales and that kind of thing. So, but for example, I would use this 3 note per string, but I'm not going to shift on my last 2 strings. So it might be this. Okay, so I didn't have to shift as much. I stayed at the 3rd fret. But again, we see some wide stretches in that situation. The other thing that may not be that great for you is that you have a double of 1 note. You repeat 1 note. Okay, so when you're doing sequences and that kind of thing, you're going to get a repeated note. So it may not sound good. You may want to just go ahead and shift down. A lot of people probably think, why won't you just shift down? But depending if you're playing just on 2 strings, you know, you could get that kind of thing or whatever. So it's good to, that's again why I like to learn shapes first on 2 strings at a time and work my way up and down the fretboard and then add them together to go across. So again, the bottom line is, when you build these things up, you're going to decide what you want to do. There's lots of great players that use both different ones, and I don't think that you should just necessarily say I'm only going to do this, except if you're starting out and you're a beginner and you just want to get some scales under your belt, then probably stick to one pattern, learn that, and then you can expand after that. Great. Okay, the next thing, let's talk about our fret hand. So we have just a couple of different options, and again, this isn't necessarily for any particular scale, but what it is when you go to break things down, hopefully you're going to do a little bit of research and goal planning to get yourself to play better. Even if it's just, I'm going to play this one scale for 10 minutes a day, it's still good to make a plan so that you can progress better on the guitar. So the first question is the pinky. Are you going to use this pinky or not, and how much? You may decide that every time you do a scale, you're going to use the pinky wherever it makes most sense. Some positions, it may be more difficult, like if I tried to stretch this 5-fret stretch without my pinky, but some people may be able to do it. I know if you play the common A minor pentatonic, some people will not use their pinky with that, and that's fine if that's how you're comfortable. I know there are a lot of great players like Gary Moore who didn't use his pinky necessarily for those. Now, when he played a little faster passages, perhaps he put the pinky in there. But one disadvantage to using the pinky if you're just new to it is trying to bend with it. Now, I've used my pinky probably from the beginning. I tried to incorporate it, and it is difficult, but there are plenty of exercises to strengthen your pinky, so don't get discouraged if you want to do that. But there are plenty of guys that don't, and they may do it when they're playing, again, faster passages, but when they're playing more of a bluesy stuff, then they won't use their pinky. So it's just something to consider. Then the next thing that kind of goes along with that is, what are you going to do when you get to these higher frets? If you've had the guitar for any time, you've realized that the spacing between the frets here is a lot wider. As we get down here to the higher frets, especially above the 15th fret is kind of the marker that I put, it gets really tight up here. And again, this is something you're going to have to feel out yourself. Some people suggest once you get to the 15th fret, then you should abandon the pinky, because now if we look at that same 5-fret stretch, it's not so difficult for me to play without my pinky. But again, there are players, Paul Gilbert being one of them, that I have seen, even on a 24-fret neck, that are able to play all of these same fingerings with their pinky, and they don't have an issue. So you're going to have to kind of figure that out as you practice your scales. But if you're going to be practicing sequences or two-string patterns rather, you're going to work your way, and shapes, you're going to work your way all the way up the fretboard, I suggest you go at least to the 12th fret, probably at least down to the 15th. Now, some guys, they'll play higher on the neck, but maybe only on the G, the B, and the E string, so that might not be as big of an issue for them. It's up to you what you're going to decide what you want to put into your practice regime. Okay, and Let's see what my notes say here. Oh, will you change your fingers for your sequences? So if we kind of look at that G major 3-note per scale that I was playing before, I have this switch here. When I'm on the D and the G string, I'm playing the 4th fret. When I'm on the B and the E, I'm playing the 5th fret with my first finger. So if I'm going to do a sequence like, now when I get to the G string, I've got to shift that first finger here, and depending on your sequence, it can get even more complicated than that. So that's just something to think about, and it's not necessarily always covered in instructional videos. I've seen a lot of them, and they just say, okay, play this pattern, or you might get a piece of tablature and it doesn't tell you what your fingering is. Now it may make sense to you, since on the G string my middle finger is already at the 5th fret. I'll just use my middle finger until I make the shift. And that way. Or you may want to bounce your first finger back and forth. Again, maybe this is too much detail, but I'm really studying this because I think you can't be over prepared if you're really trying to increase your technique and your ability to, play good music on the guitar. So it's something that you want to think about. So personally, I like to keep my finger in the same, my fingers on the same frets as where they would go. So if I'm going to use my first finger on the 5th fret of the B string, then I'm going to bounce my first finger back and forth. You're almost always going to come down to the same debate, and that is, if it's harder, maybe I should avoid it, and then it'll be easier for me to play guitar, or if it's harder, I should do it, and that's just to make me stronger. So that's going to be a debate that you're going to have to pick and choose on each little section. Okay, picking. That's another thing. What are you going to do about picking when you are practicing scales? Now, there are two, I would think, the two most popular ways of approaching picking would be either alternate or economy, and we're going to talk about those two. There are definitely some other options. Let's talk about those, though. Alternate, in my opinion, from what my research, from what I've seen, is probably the most popular way to pick quickly on the guitar to play a rapid succession of notes. And there's good reasons for it. Let's look at some of those. When you do alternate picking, you're going to go down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, or if you start on an upstroke, up, down, up, down, up, down, whatever. You get the idea. And that is, I think, for your brain, very logical. It's almost like walking, right? Right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, and then you can progress to running quite easily. If for some reason we walked in a way that we took 2 right steps and then a left step, then that could be very difficult to get faster. It depends on what you're doing, though. I suppose if we're ascending a flight of stairs with a heavy load or something, we may do that in certain situations, take 2 right steps and left. But for the most part, right, left, right, left, right, left. So up, down, up, down, up, down makes the most sense. And the other thing is, if we go back to what we're talking about with if you put that with the 3 notes per string, then I get very uniform picking. I'm going to have 3 notes on every string. The first group, if we look at 2-string shapes, the first group's going to have a down, up, down, and the second one's going to be up, down, up. And I get that consistently on the other 2 pairs of strings. Okay? So that's some advantages to the alternate picking. Now, why would some people not use alternate picking? Well, it could be argued that it's slightly slower if you look at it from purely a physics standpoint because of economy of movement. When you go and switch strings, you have to jump over the string and then pull up on it. I think that is probably not going to be a problem unless you're getting into some extreme speeds, like over 200 beats per minute. Now, I'm nowhere near an authority on this as far as playing quickly, so if others want to chime in, that's fine. But I don't think it's really a problem unless you're really like trying to break the world record of picking or that kind of thing, speed picking. So I don't really see that as a problem, but you may, I wanted to put it out there. I'm trying to have an exhaustive list here. The other thing along lines with that is because you're actually, in theory, moving a little more, then your hand could get tired if you played like a 2-hour show and you were playing a whole bunch of passages up, down, or more importantly, if you're practicing, say, 4 or 5 hours a day, because you really have to be careful when you practice, especially scales, and you're new to it. You could seriously injure your hands, and this is said over and over, on the internet. So you want to be careful with that, because if you injure, then you're not going to be able to practice at all, and it's actually counterproductive. So the economy motion, again, that's the second one. It makes sense from a physics standpoint because you're using less motion, and it could help as far as your hand, as far as how much energy you're spending. But again, unless you're going at a very, very rapid speed, then maybe it's not a difference. But if I use the same example, we have this G major, 3 notes per string pattern, shape rather, and first with the alternate it was down, up, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Now instead I'm going to do 2 consecutive downstrokes, because I don't have to jump over that second string, as I said. So I'm basically going to do down, up, down on every string. Okay, then if I'm going the other way, if I'm going descending, I'm going to go up, down, up on every string. And it is less motion. Now, the reason that probably not everyone uses that, well, first of all, I don't think it's as popular or popularized, if you want to say that. Most books, videos, and anything else you read are going to say alternate pick, strict alternate picking, up, down, up, down, down, up, down, up, down, up, strict. The second reason is that it's kind of breaks up. If we go back to the walking example, right, left, right, left, right, left, you have that extra sweep. Now, once you practice it, I don't think it's a problem at all, and I think you actually get a rhythm of sorts in that. But for someone like me that's been alternate picking for a long time, it could be a little more difficult. Another thing with the alternate picking, if I'm going to play a sequence, okay, like something like that where I send 3 notes at a time, it's not really anything to figure out. As Paul Gilbert once said, if I pick down, you just do the opposite the next time. So every time I'm going to go, again, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, even though I switch strings. Now, if you're going to stick with the economy, you're going to have to do a little figuring out. Now, once you figure certain things out, I'm sure the patterns are going to repeat. But again, if we compare these two, I'm going to have down, up, whoops, up, down, up. It's easier to play it than talk. With the economy, I'm going to have a little break in there, because again, I'm going to have a sweep in between those strings not to jump over. So it's actually going to work at down, up, down, down, and then up, down, up. So like this, if I do it slowly. So I guess you could say it's a group of 9 that would repeat over and over. And if you really want to analyze it, the difference on the alternate is the 6th note, I'm jumping over that string, and it's what they would call an outside pick. Right there is that upstroke on the 2nd string. With the economy, I'm getting an inside pick on the 8th stroke. There's up and down on that 2nd string. I've got an up and down in between the strings. So that may be something that you're comfortable with and you're like, oh, I like that better, or you may just want to stick with the alternate picking. Again, I know this is crazy details, but I really think it's important. And you can apply this to individual licks if you're trying to play a part of a song or a solo, and for some reason, man, I just can't get that part. You may want to analyze it and switch it around, because there are, again, I'm going to come with the same conclusion. It's best to know both, and not necessarily full scales with economy picking, but things like sweep picking. Okay, you're not going to be able to do as easily, if at all, in certain situations, like, you know, the lick from Over the Mountain. Okay, that's much slower, but in the beginning we have 3 downstrokes. If you try to go down, up, down on 3 consecutive strings, it's going to be a little more difficult. So even though you might be a strict alternate picker, you may put some economy picking in certain situations. The other thing is that there are lots of other little details to consider as far as just picking. And you should check out my other video on it's just a video on picking, and it covers all these in even more detail. Yay, more detail. So what we've got is, how are you going to hold the pick? Okay, is it between your thumb? Are you putting your finger on the side? Are you going to use 2 fingers, 3 fingers? There's examples of great players that do a whole bunch of stuff. What kind of pick are you going to use? Is it going to be a normal size, a bigger one, a smaller one? Are you going to have a very stiff, like 1 millimeter or larger? Or are you going to use a flexible pick? There are recommendations, but again, you know, there's examples of others. Are you going to have an anchor, and is that going to be your hand like right here, or is it going to be your forearm? Are you going to pick with your forearm or your wrist, or are you going to do kind of like, you know, a Sarid type, or even a scalpel where you kind of just use your thumb and your finger, that kind of thing? So you might want to check that out at some other things, either Google it or look at my picking video. Okay, so the last thing, hopefully you're still watching, I know this is a long video, but trust me, it's worth it, is how are you going to hold your guitar when you practice? Okay, this is something that I ignored for a long time. I don't know how much it held me back, but first thing is, are you going to have a strap or not? You see I have the strap. Now, when you have the guitar in your lap, and then if your strap isn't the same exact length, if you're going to stand up while you play live, and hopefully that's why you're practicing the guitar, is to play with other musicians, because that's the greatest part of it, the whole, you know, fun and everything, and engaging the audience and all that thing, but maybe you're not. Then is it going to move significantly? Because that's going to affect how your wrist is, and it's also going to affect your picking, perhaps, you know, depending on if you anchor it or not. Okay, and then the next thing is, we have this classical one. I was going to move the camera, but anyway, let's see. Can't really see it as well, but basically you have the guitar is sitting here, okay, in the inside of both of your legs, so that the neck is sitting up like this. You're going to have to prop up your knee somehow. I think they have an actual stool they use for a classical, and then the guitar is nice, the picking is here, and all that kind of thing. And this, when you use a strap, it's probably a little closer. Now, most people, this is how I learned, they're going to rest it on their right knee for a righty, on their left leg for a lefty, and then they're going to play like this. It makes a difference. I just suggest that not necessarily you choose one or the other, but try both ways when you're practicing and see if one of them feels more comfortable than the other, and it could help you. So that's something that you want to figure out. Okay, so the bottom line, I know this is a long video and hopefully you're watching it, but the reason that I do this is because of consistency. This is why I'm checking every little last detail, and again, no matter how much you pay attention to the consistency, it's going to help your playing. Okay, it's kind of like I grew up on a beach, in a beach town. We had a boardwalk, we had the arcade games, and you might have seen this one with the clown heads, and you shoot the water onto the tab in the clown's mouth, and then the balloon blows up, and whoever blows the balloon up first wins the game. And what is the key to that game? It's holding the gun out and keeping that stream right in the spot where it's supposed to be. And whoever does that immediately and for the longest time is going to win the game. I look at guitar playing that way, and especially practicing. If your hand wavers a little bit, you're going to get some, the balloon's going to inflate, and you're going to get some advantage from that, and you're going to get a reward from that in your playing. But for the same minute that you're wavering your hand, and the other person who doesn't waver and is paying attention to every little detail, they're going to get a lot more out of their practice time. So again, it's not necessarily how much you practice, but how you practice. And if you pay attention to every little detail and you're consistent, because everything on the guitar, or at least a lot of things, come down to muscle memory. And if you're telling your brain the same thing in every little detail over and over, it's going to remember a lot faster, and you're going to see greater results. So if you haven't subscribed, please do. If you have any feedback, I'd like to hear it, and I'm trying to increase, my ability, and hopefully this encourages you to keep practicing. Check out my website, jacksguitarplanet.com. Take care.